Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because by the time this story is over, you will be glad you are not in the mountains tonight. There is a particular kind of silence in the Appalachian backcountry. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty house or a calm evening. Something older. Something that presses against you from all directions and makes the smallest sound. The snap of a branch, the cry of an owl far off in the dark, feel like a message intended specifically for you. People who have spent time deep in those mountains describe it the same way, regardless of where they grew up or what they believe. They describe the feeling of being watched. The feeling that the forest is paying attention. In the autumn of 1899, a survey crew working for the Tanner Colby Timber Company was sent into a stretch of the Nantahala Range in the southwestern corner of North Carolina. Their assignment was routine: chart the timber value of a 6-mile corridor between two ridgelines that the company was considering for purchase. The crew consisted of 4 men: a lead surveyor named Wallace Greer, a timber assessor named Rufus Clay, and 2 laborers identified in company records only as Nolan and Pete. They carried enough provisions for 8 days and were expected to return to the company outpost at Wesser by October the 14th. They came back on October the 12th, 2 days early. And not one of them would speak about what they had found. We know this because of a letter Wallace Greer wrote to his brother in Asheville 3 weeks after the survey. That letter was donated to the North Carolina State Archives in 1974 by Greer's granddaughter, Miriam Elise Tatum. It is 4 pages long, written in a cramped and unsteady hand, entirely unlike the neat, precise penmanship visible in Greer's earlier professional correspondence. Something had shaken him badly, and reading that letter today, it is not difficult to understand why. The Nantahala Range in 1899 was not uninhabited wilderness. There were families scattered through those mountains who had lived there for 3 and 4 generations. Small communities around creek-fed valleys. Subsistence farms carved from steep hillsides. The kind of people who did not appear in census records with any regularity, and who regarded outsiders with a wariness that was, given the history of those mountains, entirely reasonable. Greer's crew had encountered such families before. They knew the protocols. You announced yourself from a distance. You explained your business. You kept your hands visible, and you did not linger. What they found on the 4th day of the survey was different from any homestead they had encountered before. They were working along the western face of a ridge called Cutter's Back, a name that appears in older survey records without explanation, but that locals in the area seemed to understand and seemed to say quietly when they said it at all. The terrain was difficult. The slope was steep and densely wooded. Progress was slow. Nolan, who was cutting trail ahead of the group, was the first to see it. He stopped. He did not call back to the others. He simply stopped moving, and when Greer came up behind him and followed his line of sight, he understood immediately why. The cabin sat in a narrow notch between 2 outcrops of limestone rock, half hidden by a stand of old hemlocks whose branches had grown low and interlocking over the structure until the roof was nearly invisible from more than 40 yards away. Greer estimated it had been built perhaps 30 or 40 years prior. The logs were well fitted, and the chimney was standing, which suggested someone had known what they were doing. But the details, as the crew drew closer, were something else entirely. There were no windows on the front face of the cabin, not boarded over or shuttered, simply not there. The front wall was unbroken timber from ground to roofline. The door, which hung on leather hinges, was positioned slightly off-center, not dramatically, just enough that it was wrong. The way a face looks wrong when the features are symmetrical, but placed just slightly out of proportion. The door was carved, not decorated. Carved, every inch of the outer surface was covered in small, densely packed marks. Greer described them in his letter as crosses, but crosses of a kind he had never seen in a church. Two horizontal bars crossing a vertical one, the lower horizontal slightly longer than the upper, arranged in rows so precise they had clearly been made with deliberate intention. Rufus Clay said they should move on. His voice, Greer noted, was very controlled when he said it. The kind of controlled that means a man is working hard to keep something from showing on his face. They did not move on. The smell reached them before they reached the door. Greer described it carefully. Not rot, not decay in the ordinary sense, but something sweet and chemical underneath the normal forest smells, like pine sap, but heavier, almost medicinal. He had encountered a similar smell once, he wrote, in a tannery in Bryson City. The smell of preservation, the smell of something that had been treated specifically to last. The door was not locked. It opened inward when Greer pushed it. What they found inside is described in that letter in a sequence of short, controlled sentences that read like a man trying to hold himself together on the page. There was a single room, a fireplace on the far wall, cold, with no ash in it, not cleaned, simply unused, the fireplace of a person who had never lit a fire inside that structure. A floor of packed earth, swept clean. A table, one chair, and on every wall, floor to ceiling, hanging from wooden pegs driven into the logs at intervals of approximately 1 foot, there were objects. Greer struggled in his letter to describe them precisely. Bundles of some kind, wrapped in oilskin cloth, tied with twine, each one approximately the size and shape of a man's forearm. There were hundreds of them. Greer made an estimate and arrived at somewhere between 300 and 400, though he wrote that the count was impossible to be precise about because the light was poor and the objects were arranged closely enough that they were difficult to distinguish from one another in the shadows. He took one down from its peg. He unwrapped it. In his letter to his brother, Wallace Greer described what was inside the wrapping as bones. Small ones, he wrote. The kind of bones that belong inside a hand. He hung it back on its peg. He put it exactly where it had been. He made sure the twine was retied. He wrote that he did not know why he was so careful about that. He simply felt, standing in that room, that things needed to stay where they were. The crew left the cabin. They did not discuss it as they walked. They made camp 2 miles further along the ridge that evening, and by unspoken agreement, no one built a fire. Nolan had not said a single word since he first saw the structure. He did not eat that night. Greer wrote that Nolan sat at the edge of camp and watched the dark between the trees for so long that eventually, out of worry, Greer went and put a hand on his shoulder. Nolan flinched as though he had been struck. Then he apologized. He said he kept thinking he could hear something. A sound from back up the ridge. They left the survey incomplete and hiked out the next morning. Greer returned to the Tanner Colby office in Wesser and filed his report. In that official document, which survives in the company's archived records, now held at Western Carolina University, he made no mention of the cabin. He noted the survey had been conducted and recommended against timber purchase on grounds of poor road access and marginal timber yield. It was a professional document, tightly controlled. There is nothing in it that would raise any question. But in the letter to his brother, he wrote something that he had clearly been turning over in his mind for the 3 weeks since the survey. He wrote that what disturbed him most was not the bones. What disturbed him was the table. It had been set, not with plates or utensils, but a single item had been placed at the center of the table, with a care and deliberateness that felt, he wrote, like an act of profound intention. It was a pocket watch. Stopped, the hands arrested at 20 minutes before 4. The case was silver, engraved on the back with a man's name that Greer wrote down, then crossed out so thoroughly in the letter that it is not legible in the archival copy. Greer wrote that he did not know what the cabin was for. He did not know who had built it, or who used it, or whether anyone still did. He wrote that he was not a man given to superstition, that he had spent 20 years in remote backcountry and had never been afraid of what he found there, and that he was telling his brother this story not because he expected to be believed, but because he needed to say it to someone he trusted, because he had not slept soundly since October the 12th. The letter ends there, mid-page, as though he stopped writing and did not come back. Rufus Clay died in February of 1900, 4 months after the survey. The cause listed in county records is pneumonia, which was common enough, but his wife, in a statement given to her pastor and preserved in the church records of First Baptist in Bryson City, said that in the weeks before his death, her husband had become convinced that something was in the house. She said he would get up in the night and stand at the windows, looking out. She said he told her once, when she pressed him, that it was the smell, that he kept catching a smell he recognized from somewhere he would not name. Nolan was never listed in the company's full employee records. He appears only on that single survey crew manifest, with no surname, no home address, and no subsequent record of any kind. Whether he left the area, changed his name, or simply ceased to exist in any documentable way is unknown. Today, the stretch of the Nantahala Range where Greer's crew conducted that survey in 1899 falls within the Nantahala National Forest. It is hiking and camping country, well mapped and well traveled. Several trails cross the area of Cutter's Back Ridge. The United States Forest Service maintains trail markers throughout the corridor. There are no historical designations on any structure in that zone. There are no cabins listed on any public land record for that section of the ridge. In 2011, a hiker named David Recht filed a report with the Forest Service describing a structure he had encountered while off-trail on the western face of the Cutter's Back area. He described it as an old collapsed log building, mostly hidden by hemlock growth. He noted in his report that the logs had carvings on them. He said the smell in the area was unusual. He could not identify it. He described it as sweet, chemical, like something preserved. The Forest Service logged his report. No follow-up visit has been recorded. There are places in this world that exist outside the normal systems of memory and record. Not because they are supernatural, not because they defy explanation, but because whatever happened there was handled by people who understood, with complete clarity, that some things are better left unknown. The cabin in the Nantahala woods was not discovered. It was not investigated. It was documented once by a frightened surveyor who crossed out the one piece of evidence that might have led somewhere, and then it was filed away and forgotten. Wallace Greer crossed that name out for a reason. Think about what kind of reason is powerful enough to make a man hide evidence of what he saw from his own brother. Here is what I want you to think about and answer in the comments below. Do you believe there are places and objects in this world that are better left alone, that some knowledge is genuinely too dangerous to pursue? Or do you believe that every mystery, no matter how dark, deserves to be fully uncovered? There is no comfortable middle ground on that question. Drop your answer below. If this story reached into you and you want more, if the dark corners of American history are where you find yourself coming back, again and again, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. There are more stories where this one came from. Not easy ones, but real ones. The mountains do not give up what they hold. Not to surveyors, not to hikers, not to anyone who has not earned that knowledge in ways most of us would never choose. Until next time, stay out of the woods.